The 411 Live.
Where you can learn about issues that affect us every day. State of world, 411 Live.
Real people, real talk.
Made to help people in our community in every way. For your girl, 411 Live.
Since the tragic killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, some amazing things have happened. Protests with people of mixed races holding up Black Lives Matter signs. We've even seen police officers sometimes joining protesters. And there has been legislation passed, police reform legislation in the House of Representatives. That's just a start. Hello, everyone. This is the 411 Live, Real People, Real Talk. I'm Beverly Taylor. This is actually part 2 of a podcast dealing with the immediate impact stemming from the killing of George Floyd and the potential future impact. 2 guests have agreed to come back or stay with me, and that being former U.S. Attorney James Santelle, now in private practice, and attorney Lynnette McNeely, and she is the chair of legal redress for the NAACP, Wisconsin State Conference of Branches. Thank you both for agreeing to part 2.
Thank you for having us.
Sure thing.
Fine.
We covered a lot in part 1, but we had so much more to cover. So it just made sense to have a part 2. We talked a lot about George Floyd and the killing of him on May 25th and how that impacted, I guess, all of us. Kind of our thinking about justice, equality, our country. So now we have all the protests, and they go on a daily basis with a lot of people of all ages and races. And I was thinking back to protests within our country, and it really resonated with me because I just completed an audiobook narration that I was working on, and it's called Mercy Extended by Linda Oberbrunner. In it, she talks about participating in protests in the 60s dealing with the housing issue in Milwaukee. And it was just odd that I was reading about this and all of this was taking place. But you think about then, and you had certain leaders, Val Phillips, Father Grappi come to mind, and you think about what we have now, and you can pick out a few people, key people. The names keep coming back, but not necessarily a prominent leader. But I'm wondering, is that necessary? Do you need that? Do the protesters need to outline specific things that they want beyond, justice, equality? Or do they continue to protest on a daily basis, make awareness that something has to be done, and hope that the leaders, the legislators, will come up with viable solutions? You get where I'm coming from? What's the best method here?
I say both and, Black Lives Matter, I think was an organization that started around 2015, is that correct?
Right.
In Los Angeles. And they were a group of women who said, you know what? We're sick of seeing our individuals who look like our children getting killed. We need to do something about it. They rose up and empowered others. And the way they've set up the organization, from what I understand, it's a decentralized organization. So there's no, unlike the NAACP, we have our national office and our satellite offices. Black Lives Matter is decentralized. Whoever wants to put forth the effort, get together and make it happen.
More like a grassroots organization.
Total grassroots, but organic. So whoever feels the need to develop this issue or bring it out, go for it. And I thought that was a very refreshing approach to making change. There's some benefits to that. We've seen you have people in Waukesha taking up the initiative. You have people in Menominee Falls, and they don't have to wait for the approval of anyone. They just need to have the passion. So it works in that regard. But it is nice to have hierarchy too, because to your point, who do you talk to resolve? But I think with this instance, with this protest situation today, I'm seeing probably for the first time in a long time, this belief that we are the people. In order to make a more perfect union, we need to be together and work together and contribute. It's not about getting your permission. It's not about talking to you about it either. It's about an issue that we're joined on and we're passionate about, and we have a right to speak up as Americans about something that we know to be wrong. And that's what's happening under this movement. And that's refreshing.
Yeah. Yeah. Any thoughts, Jim?
Absolutely. You will not be a bit surprised to hear me say that I agree completely with Lynnette in this concept, this notion that there's a combination, right, of all kinds of things, firing on big ticket issues, and then also getting into the grassroots to do the specific work. And to that, I would add, and I think it is responsive to your question, the notion that we do not need more study commissions. We don't need more committees. We don't need more analyses that take 5 and 6 months or even 5 and 6 years, because we've done that. And just like in the area of gun violence, we know what works. We apply it. In those states that have adopted 6 or 7 basic policies, they reduce gun violence. In this area also, when it comes to policing and racial sensitivity and engagement of the community, we know what works in those areas, because there are cities in America where, with imperfect results, a lot of these things have been applied. And so you will not be surprised to hear me say that I'm a big fan of something called President Barack Obama's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, together in the wake of Ferguson, and said we've got to do something. Again, going back to in the earlier program, this notion of this is not new to us. He sat people down. He brought in police, but also brought in community leaders, private commerce, academics, everybody involved in this, and said, what do we do with this? And they came back 5 or 6 months later. And yes, they produced a 100-page document, which sounds very government-like, I know, but they also produced a 50-page implementation piece. And if you go to it, if you can bear with me, the categories of it alone capsulize, I think, what gets to your question, Lynnette's comments also, which is broad picture issues and then boiled down to specific things that are available to access. And so Barack Obama's task force talked about building trust and legitimacy, right? That's number one. Policy and oversight on the street, the kinds of things we've talked about. Technology and social media. Lynnette mentioned that in the previous program. Community policing and crime reduction. Training and education, and then officer wellness and safety. Also part of this. And inside of those broad categories, believe it or not, are 59 different, very specific things at work. And so you can see us on any one of those broad protest issues and find a way to implement it legislatively with your local aldermen and women, your local alders, your mayor, your police chief. It is there, it's accessible, and we can do it with just as much urgency as all the protesters are advocating for. And that's the exciting part of this in the midst of great tragedy in the wake of these horrific events. It's accessible to us, and we can make this happen as quickly as the House of Representatives passed legislation and as quickly as our governor in the state of Wisconsin is identifying mechanisms. We can make things happen. It's not going to happen overnight in terms of implementation. It does take a while. That's the nature of government. That's the nature of law enforcement and the nature of human nature. But we can get to these points fairly immediately. And to your question, Beverly, we can bring those big protest issues into specific implementation that will make a change on the streets of America.
Very good. Very good. Now, you refer to the House of Representatives, and I had mentioned that too. They passed the bill, but it's stuck. I mean, the House passed it. The Senate has a version of their bill that has gone nowhere. So we applaud the House, but we're still waiting. It's like, can we get anything done?
That is the frustration.
Yeah, as Jim explained, we don't need enough, the process, the bureaucracy has been the holdup. People are looking for more immediate results. So maybe that is another solution that might come through the pike. I know there's ways to get certain legislation passed, whether it be through executive order or some other type of quicker fix. But I think in Wisconsin, we're seeing a level of hostility with executive orders. So we don't know how well that would work today. But we do have the Light of the Vote, and that's coming up in November. And we encourage everyone out there who's not registered to vote to get registered. You can contact us at the NAACP, any one of our branches, whether it's Milwaukee, Waukesha, Beloit, Racine, Kenosha, Madison, Dane County. We're here for you. And there's several other organizations like ACLU and the Women's Voters League. And we're out here. We can help you get registered. And if you are registered, register someone else, at least one other person in your life. Try to find that person who's not and get them registered before November so we can vote Wisconsin back to where it needs to be, vote the country back to where we believe it should be too, and we can start doing good work again.
Do you think people will be motivated to vote? I mean, my thought initially is yes, but, I don't know. And you were talking about these organizations. These organizations were able to go out into the community and, get out the vote campaigns and register people to vote. With COVID-19, that kind of curtails a lot of that kind of activity. What do you think the impact will be?
Following up on Lynnette's good words here, I think she's onto something that's huge. And I do not in any way mean to diminish the significance of protests and advocacy into the First Amendment. But voting is the key here. And if we can do civic education, explaining the connection between your protest in Sherman Park this afternoon, or in downtown Milwaukee, or in Waukesha, or any place around the state of Wisconsin or in the nation, how do you get that done in the end? The single most important thing you can do is vote in August, vote in November. And one of the things that I'm always surprised at, I suspect the two of you are as well, is the extent to which people don't understand that connection. We're midst also of a time when our Supreme Court every June is issuing very significant opinions. Perhaps as soon as depending upon when this airs, they may have already issued these opinions, but they're coming out right now. And people ask, well, gee, I'm opposed to that. How can I change the Supreme Court? And people say, well, I can't. The answer is yes. Where do Supreme Court justices come from? Ultimately, they come from voting. Why? Because Supreme Court justices are appointed by a president who is publicly elected. Where does an attorney general come from? Where do U.S. attorneys come from? They come from voting by virtue of, again, voting in a president. If you are serious about moving the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act from the House to the Senate and addressing those issues there, you need to vote. We don't have a Senate election here in Wisconsin this time around. You need to vote to get that accomplished. And so I think Lynnette's point is the single most important thing perhaps we can convey today, which is looking forward, the single most important compelling thing you can do is register and vote. And candidly, I will be so emphatic about this. This is going to sound a bit harsh. If you are out there today and you are protesting and you are not registered and you're eligible and you're not registered to vote, shame on you. And if you do not vote in November and things do not go your way, I don't believe you don't give up the amendment right, but your credibility with me is going to diminish dramatically. Vote. Right, and exercise that right. That's how you change all of this.
Right, and to just piggyback on that, run for office. If you don't like, my dad used to always tell me, quit your complaining. If you don't like the way people are doing something, you join them and you change it. And I think that's going to be the message coming up. And granted, the signatures are already in, I think as of May 31st, for those who were looking to run for office for the August election, is it? Or maybe even November, August. Is there a primary in August?
I believe there is.
Yeah. So you might be a little late, but there's always next year. You can regroup. You have an audience. You have fellow protesters, potentially. And that might be a great support network to get you started. But we need to get these young people running for office and participating in policy development and making the change that they're fighting for.
Let's talk about policy development and police reform. I was looking at the House bill. It covers doing away with chokeholds and similar maneuvers. It talks about altering the qualified immunity, which we talked about in part one. This allowing victims of police brutality to seek damages. It calls for making it easier to prosecute police officers for misconduct. It calls for banning no-knock warrants in federal drug cases. It calls for an end to racial bias in policing. On the state level, the governor on Juneteenth, he came out with a proposal. It establishes a statewide use of force standards. It proposes that, and it bans police chokeholds and no-knock searches. So those things are out there legislatively. What are some other things that you see? I know you guys are proponent of community policing, bridging that relationship between the neighborhood and the police. What does that look like?
Sure. I'll take the first stab at that, and I know that Lynnette will also add her good thoughts to this as well. There are many things that we can do aside from voting. We can do them right now. One of the things I'm also very proud of inside the Department of Justice, the Federal Department of Justice, is a group called the Community Relations Service. They're not litigators, they're not prosecutors. They come into communities to do conciliation, mediation, times when, whether it's the police, groups of people who need to sit down and talk, they're the ones who facilitate that sort of thing. Among the other things that they did a long time ago, when Nanette Haggerty, you may remember.
I do.
I think, Beverly, you've uncovered her in your wonderful tenure here in Milwaukee, which continues. At that time, the Community Relations Service put together a community police relations entity, kind of exactly what you're talking about, getting people from representative agencies, including Milwaukee chapter of the NAACP, but many others, and all sorts of different groups in the area, to sit down on a regular basis with representatives of police, commissioned by the Department of Justice. So you've got this imprimatur of the government, but bringing together community leaders and individuals, addressing policies, addressing things even related to the Fire and Police Commission, addressing, what are the needs of the community, and a huge commission. One of the challenges is that entity fell away. It fell away, and at the risk of sounding very self-focused here, at the end of my tenure as U.S. Attorney, I proposed the recreation of that, and I called it the Alliance for Milwaukee's Community and Police Partnership. Just another acronym. The name is less important than this notion of bringing people together. In all of those cities that Barack Obama's task force identified that do have, again, challenges, absolutely. Perfect solutions, no. But in all those cities that are moving in the right direction, every single one of them has an entity supported by the mayor, supported by the local U.S. attorney, supported by local DAs, supported by governors and alders and all the folks who are involved in this, and committed to substantially by the police chiefs, that once a month, once every 6 weeks, whenever there's a crisis related to the community, they will get together. It's not a group of 500 people. It's probably 30 people altogether. They represent, constituencies in the population. And they sit down and they address the kinds of things that are in this legislation at the very local level. And the other thing that does, of course, and really in terms of communication, but when a crisis happens, I've already met Beverly. I've met Lynnette. It's not a matter of down and introducing myself to the first time. I know you. And if there's a crisis, I can jump right into it. And I've got some level of trust and confidence with you because for the past 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 years, I've had this engagement with you on a regular basis. Those work. Those entities work. Right. We need to enforce that concept and promote that concept in every city, among many other things that are out there.
Right. You've got to bring the right people at the table. Let's take a break. We're going to talk more about this. And I know the NAACP has some ideas as well. So we'll talk about that when we come back. Stay with us.
My God.
It's another sad day in America.
Painful to be introduced to George Floyd during his last breath with a cop's knee on his neck. He deserved so much more.
How many black lives have to be taken before something is done?
We are not a threat.
I am shaking as I type.
This has got to stop.
We are sick of it.
We need conviction.
I just want us all to live.
The deaths will not stop until the powers that be are finally held accountable.
Don't look away from the truth until every one of us are free from white supremacy.
The world stands with you. Aucune pitié, aucune compassion dans son regard et dans son
criminalizing and killing of black and brown bodies is not new. It's as old as America. It's just getting filmed more.
Do you know what it feels like to be hunted? To have a new hashtag for a dead black person every single day? How does one plan a life if they aren't sure they will have a life to plan?
Armstrong, Deborah Dan,
Megan Nina Pop, Stephen Clark, Nia Wilson,
Keisha Mike,
Christopher DeAndre,
George Floyd. His name was George Floyd. Say his name.
Say his name.
George Floyd. Say his name.
Say their names. Once again and always, we fight for justice. Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
Rest in power, beautiful.
Go to blacklivesmatter.com.
Welcome back to the 411 Live. We were talking about community relations with police, and Jim had given a lot of ideas on bringing the right people at the table, basically, to kind of talk about what's going on within the community, already having that relationship. So when a crisis arises, people can come together quickly. They don't have to reintroduce themselves. They know each other. They know where they're going. They can tackle whatever it is. I also know that the NAACP has come up with some ideas of what can be done. Lynnette, can you speak to that? I think was like 13 proposals.
So, yes, we have a proposal that we're introducing to our members and to the state and eventually to the leadership of the state of Wisconsin for our recommendations. But, we are in violent agreement with Jim that there should be a relationship that gets established. We're looking, from our vantage point, we're looking for fortification of our local communities, a reestablishment of trust. And we all know how this is done because we're human beings. We all know how we develop trust by meeting one another, by exchanging, by sitting next to one another, talking, being over each other's homes, maybe. Those are communities are all about. But we've seen in recent times, it's like there's a scarcity of contact, right? There's a scarcity of utilizing all members of the community. We want to bring some of that back. But to our 13 points, we were addressing those issues that came as a result of the death of George Floyd. So we were focusing on police changes that we believe could be implemented, or implementations that could help mitigate some of these problems we're seeing with the police community relations. So the first one was requesting that there's a demilitarization of all municipal police departments in Wisconsin. We noticed that in this county of Milwaukee, there's 19, I believe, potentially different police departments that we're dealing with here. So all of those police departments need to be spoken to, and all of them should be demilitarizing. We've had a lot of engagement with the Milwaukee Police Department, which is just one out of the several. And we want to see more action in those other 18 potentially. If there are 18, I think there might be a few less than that. Secondly, we're looking to effectively oversee all of these municipal police departments in Wisconsin counties, establish an independent internal affairs investigator and civilian oversight board, to Jim's point, with unrestricted access to the files and documents, videos, and images that are collected by these police departments. We believe that this nuance is very key to not just have a commission that's overseeing one police department like Milwaukee's police department. Even though they're very large, it makes sense that they should have an oversight board. But we think there might be some value in having a countywide oversight board so that all of the activities that are happening in our area are being accounted for, analyzed, reviewed, and bad police officers, the rotten apples, if you will, spoiled apples, bad apples, are actually getting out of our county, getting away from, the people that could be impacted by their behavior.
With that, let me ask you this. Would that be one of those things where you have the board within the oversight, community oversight within each municipality, and then members from those committees, coming together for a county group?
Right.
You know what I
that's
mean?
A very good point. The logistics we're leaving open for, the people to decide, but that'd be a very important thing to do. Make sure that all individuals of the 19 different counties have some buy-in to the oversight, and not have it be another small elite group of people who are making decisions for the whole. This would be an opportunity for civilians all throughout our great county to be able to get to know one another and to hear what's going on for others in different cities. Because I think that's one of the problems we're seeing, especially in Wisconsin. We are isolated. We're highly segregated in this area. And so what happens on 3rd and Locust might be completely unknown to someone who lives off of 190th and Capitol, right?
Right.
And this would be a way for people in those communities to potentially, well, actually, that'd be outside of Milwaukee County, but let's say 124th and Capitol, right? That'd be a Wauwatosa area. They might not be aware of what's happening. And I think that's maybe 90% of the battle. Like, we just don't know what's going on for our brethren out there. And we're getting this momentum right now where we're listening to one another. We're seeing that there's issues that are going on with our neighbors. And so let's create a formal mechanism to continue sharing, continue being aware of what's going on, and making a change as a full community in Milwaukee. We're also looking to require the municipal officers in all of these different departments to have 80 hours of de-escalation training every year, and in compliance or in accord with the governor's Juneteenth declaration, the use of all no-knock warrants in Wisconsin counties being not available. I don't know if is that something that happens in Wisconsin? Jim, you can speak on that. And then the implementation of a statewide no-tolerance policy for the use of excessive police force. So, we're seeing that we're operating in parallel with them, but there's still little things that we would like to see change. And the last few that we have are looking at mental health resources for all municipal police officers, asking for training for nonviolent or reducing the training for firearms and other violent tactics, asking for 40 hours of cultural awareness of all police in the area, and body cameras, making all the police in the area wear them, and whatever they record becomes public information immediately and not information that gets massaged by police departments before they're administered to the public. And then provide access to data on citizen complaints and inquiries so that all of us know, even if we have a small board of individuals or a civilian oversight board, we want information about complaints to be available to all people in the area. So, as a member of the community, what's going on and which officers are doing what. I think that'd be very helpful.
Got you. So you guys are, when you finalize this plan and send it off, who will ultimately get it? You will be sending it to the different municipalities or to the government? How does that work?
We start with our local county governments and see if there's something that they could partner with us on as far as for advocating for it. We do need to do some more research on logistically how this might play out. There may be some legislative prohibitions on what we're asking for, so we may have to tweak it in that regard. But sitting down at all levels, the states, the counties, and the cities, and to figure out a solution so that all citizens can feel that their communities are being refortified, and that there's trust.
Right.
So we got to do it.
Let's talk.
And
Go ahead.
If I can just endorse that, because there are two things packed into what Lynnette just said, which I think are also worthy of emphasis. One is flexibility, right? That under these broad articulations of very important things, just like Obama's task force, you've got these things that work, but they're not cookie cutter, right? The things you do in Milwaukee are going to be different than things you do in Wausau, different than you do in La Crosse, right? All over the place. And so the nice thing about what wonderful thing that Lynnette is describing is you've got that flexibility for local alders to take it, for county executives, county supervisors, mayors, police chiefs, to figure out how it works in Jefferson County, how it works in Brown County.
Make it their own.
Make it their own. The other piece of this, which I know you're going to talk about again, but I'm so thrilled to hear this, is just that importance of training, right? Training from the start, from along the way to the very day, the 2 days before you retire. after a good career as a law enforcement officer, continued focus on that, experiential training. The world changes also, as we're indicating here, even on what the law is. So officers need to know what is qualified immunity, what are chokeholds all about, what are no-knock warrants. And so, again, I'm very proud of the fact the Department of Justice did a lot of that with MPD. That's got to continue. That's what the NAACP's proposal also incorporates and proposes.
Absolutely.
I think it's really key to point out that we are in complete agreement with training, and it's almost like milking a cow. You never stop, right? You got to keep milking that cow every day. And so when it comes to being an officer in the community, you're introduced to new experiences and different scenarios, and you might catch yourself off guard based on all that we're asking you to do as police officers, because they're doing amazing work for our communities, but they're also human beings too. And so the buildup could be there, so the training would be required. A weird scenario happens, the training is going to be required. So continuing the training is going to be so important. But more importantly, with our plan, we thought that training is going to get us, and it's not going to get us as much without community interaction. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, police officers don't have to live in the cities that they police. I believe there's a legislative change for that. And that was dangerous from our vantage point, because when you don't have that connection to the people that you're policing, as a police officer, all you see is the bad times, right? Not the good times, not the kids going to school and talking about how great the officers are. You just see people in need and in trauma and in drama. And so that becomes the way you perceive that community. So we're asking in our plan for more interaction with the community. We're going to work on changing legislation that allows them to live outside those areas or the communities that they're policing. We'll fix that. But today, we'd like to see a commitment to community service, having all officers be required to give those hours back to the community so that they get the balanced perception of the people that they're policing.
Right. And, with the training thing, I hope that there's an emphasis too on implicit bias, know thyself, know what you're bringing into situations. I think that is so important. The other thing I want to talk about is the whole defunding, defunding police departments. You hear that thrown around. That means different things to different people. I know that Milwaukee is looking at what it would look like to take 10% from the police department and allocate it in different areas. What do you guys think about the whole idea of defunding? Or should there be another phrase that we use for that?
There's always better marketing. I mean, that's why we have that industry, right? $17 gazillion industry on branding. I think it's a step in the right direction from my vantage point. Not because I believe there should be no police. Police are an extremely important function, especially in a society like ours. We need them. We can't get rid of them 100%, and nobody's trying to. I think that there's a misunderstanding of what defunding means. And I think a better word to answer your question might be reallocation of funding, right? So instead of relying on that department for so much, pulling away some of those services and reallocating those funds to better address the needs of the community. If someone is having a mental breakdown, why is a guy with a gun being called to deal with that? And why is someone who has a gun, who has no training for that issue, being asked to deal with it? So being smarter about the policy that we engage and how we provide services or emergency services to the community. We can be smarter with technology, and we can get access to databases. Officers can know, or our infrastructure will know who is asking for this help. We have more information on those calls. So why don't we use that data to have smarter resolutions provided? And if we shift this funding over, maybe we can start bringing those solutions to the community that are better for the community, reestablishing trust with the community.
We talk about all these points, things that could be done, things that should be explored. Are you guys hopeful that it will happen?
I am extremely hopeful. not only because of the energy that we talked about in part one and the focus that is now part of our national fiber and our community and everything that we do and say these days. I'm also hopeful because, as I said before, I think there are the mechanisms to make things happen. I do believe that there is a spirit of America that is irrepressible, and I think that we're seeing a lot of that right now. I also think, to Lynnette's last point, that we can channel that enthusiasm and possibility about the future, putting aside the specific language. I also like reallocation. I like words like reimaging and restructuring and revisioning and all those kinds of very positive words that are out there. So language is important. The substance is even more important. And the other piece of this that I'm enthused about is the concept that we no longer just look at policing in a silo, that we recognize that some of the reallocation that Lynnette was talking about is going to be, frankly, outside of the police community. It's going to be in education. It's going to be in healthcare. It's going to be in basic social services. It's going to be in transportation and business opportunities. And the concern that I have, even in the midst of this enthusiasm and excitement, is if we think we're going to check the box by doing all these wonderful policing things, we will not be successful. Why? Because we haven't addressed the whole panoply of things. Our issues in America are profound when it comes to policing, and our challenges are great, and our accomplishments are also great, but that's not exclusive focus. It's got to be a broad-based attack on this. And to the extent that money is important, that reallocation, re-envisioning, and reimagining policing has got to bring everybody to that table. That's a huge task, right? But it's also a part of the enthusiasm that we can tap into. The community has got to understand, as we always have had to understand, that housing is related to healthcare, is related to jobs, is related to schooling, is related to family status. They're not stovepipe. So true of policing and all these other areas.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And I'll add to that really quickly. My hope is that, we're finally seeing that the business model doesn't work for government. We can't externalize. We as the people, as the government, have to account for every person's contribution or lack thereof, right? We don't have the ability to just throw people away and ignore them as participants in our society. The protesters are showing us this. We've known this intimately, but I think we've kind of gotten away from this. But now we're back. All people will have to contribute. Now, it may cost money, but, just as we've seen with the prison industrial complex, we are paying, especially in Wisconsin, almost $40,000 a year to imprison a man. If we would look at the policy of that, it doesn't make sense. We're ready to spend the money, but we're not going to insist that contribution, that individual, becomes productive.
Right. Yeah.
It's a waste of that spend. We have to stop thinking on those terms. Maybe we give that guy a $25,000 a year job to clean up his neighborhood or to, cut some shrubs. We could be more creative. So just as we're talking about defunding or reallocating funds from the police, this might be a movement for us to analyze how we can reallocate funds that we've been putting in these other areas where we're thinking we're putting a problem away or externalizing an issue, just to have it come back and be more of a problematic situation. Let's be smarter about how we're spending our money across the board.
Yeah, and create more productive citizens. You make a great point.
Everyone can contribute to this great thing that we're calling America.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, guys. Part 2. We did it. Thank you so much for all of your insight. A great discussion. I really, really appreciate your time. It's been good. And hopefully we can do it again sometime. So
you need part 3.
I know.
You need part 3, maybe part 4, right?
Jim's right. He's right.
Yeah, you guys will be regulars. So again, this is former U.S. Attorney James Santelle, now in private practice, and attorney Lynnette McNeely, and she is the chair of legal redress for the NAACP, Wisconsin State Conference of Branches. Again, thank you for your time, your conversation, your insight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. And thank you for joining us for another edition of the 411 Live, Real People, Real Talk. We have done many podcasts. We're in season 3. So if you'd like to see some of our previous podcasts, we invite you to do so. Go to YouTube. You can check us out there. Please subscribe. And of course, check us out on any of the podcast platforms that you like. We're probably there. If you would like to contribute to our efforts to further community awareness, because we're tackling a lot of different topics, we invite you to go to our website, the411live.org. You could become a sponsor. That would be great. But until next time, I'm Beverly Taylor. This is the 411 Live. Real people, real talk.